time once again for Community Forum, and we're very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning Paul Richmond. Paul Richmond is a local Seattle-based attorney. He is also a local media producer. He has been on our show before talking about issues of police accountability, militarization of the police, civil rights, and the WTO. And he is here because he is running for U.S. Congress in the 6th District of Washington State. Paul, thank you very much for spending time with us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me here, Mike. And just one quick correction. I'm actually a Port Townsend attorney. I've been there for about a year and a half.
That's right. You moved. All right. So start out and tell us, why are you running for Congress?
Well, I'm very concerned about the direction that this country is moving in. I had this interaction about a year ago with Congressman Dix when he was in Jefferson County at a picnic sponsored by the Democratic Party, and I got to ask him, I said, I was at the time working very actively, as a lot of people were, on the issue of impeachment, and I said, Mr. Dix, I'd really wish that you would consider taking a stronger stand on impeachment. And he said, well, that's not what Nancy Pelosi wants. And I said, well, excuse me, but are you representing Nancy Pelosi to us or us to Nancy Pelosi? And he got the most horrified, indignant expression that I would even dare to ask a question like that, and just moved away from me very quickly, and sort of started making me think. I started looking at some of his record, and as you know, I've been someone who's been very active looking at issues around civil liberties and our loss of liberties, and have been very active fighting to maintain these. And I see this is someone who's consistently voting to damage and take away from our civil liberties. Not only did he vote for the Patriot Act, I learned when I started hearing about something called the Homegrown Terrorism Act. I don't know, most people are familiar with it, but it's basically designed to set up study groups to determine what sort of ideologies should be illegal. When you think about that, that's basically McCarthyism amplified. He actually not only voted for it, he co-sponsored this. Other bills, people are familiar with what's happened recently with FISA, where Mr. Dix broke with the majority of Democrats in the House and voted to grant retroactive immunity to these telecoms that had spied on the U.S. population prior to September 11th, as well as increase the ability of the government to continue to sift information from us, damaging our rights under the Fourth Amendment, our privacy rights. And he also voted for something called the Defense Authorization Act of 2007. What that allows is basically it repeals posse comitatus, something I've talked about in the past, and allows the military to be used against the domestic population officially for the first time in 130 years. All of those create a very troubling trend, and when you look at that in addition to things like his votes on earlier legislation, his votes on free trade, usually, again, breaking with the majority of Democrats, you have someone whose votes really have damaged all of the Bill of Rights, that is, that section of the Constitution that is there to preserve our rights under from the government. So you can actually, at times I've held up an enormous copy of the Bill of Rights, and I've gone through his votes, and you can make large X's for every one of his votes on every one of those 10 articles that protect us.
So the 6th District where you are running, would it be fair to say that district is fairly militarized?
Well, there are sections of it that are, as there are in almost every part of the country now. We have a military-based economy. One of the main problems that we're facing is that we got out of the Depression largely through ramping up to a wartime economy in World War II. And and after World War II, we kept up that wartime economy, and we just kept ramping it up. We never got away from it. So as a result of that, when you look at this country and after we got out of World War II and we had this era of prosperity and we had these wonderful people having wonderful homes and this great education system and accessibility to things like health care, Most of that is now slipping away or outright gone. We're facing incredible housing crises. Our education system is plummeted in terms of the level of what it produces, and the cost has skyrocketed. We basically have a completely hollowed out infrastructure. And a lot of that is because we've devoted almost an inordinate amount of money to the military. The result being that what we've given to the military has basically resulted in as much damage functionally to our country as if we were invaded by a foreign army. There's no foreign nation that has ever done as much damage to this country as we have allowed to happen through giving so much to the military. And what I'm proposing, and what I've been proposing since I've got in this race, is we take that same sort of energy that we put into ramping up to a wartime economy, and we ramp down to something that's actually sustainable. We begin investing again in our local communities. We begin building up the industries that we should have. Things like and industries based on the newer technologies, sustainable fuels, building those up. Begin rebuilding education. Begin putting in making housing affordable. Begin doing things like giving everyone health care. And they're doing that in the rest of the world. We can be doing that here, as opposed to being a burden and setting a example that is taking us really into ruin.
One of the things one often hears with Congresspeople and people in the Senate who have been there a long time, as Norm Dix has, is that he really brings a lot of money back to his district and supports a lot of jobs there. What's your response to that?
No, and that's what he's running on. Oh, I'm bringing in jobs. You know, unfortunately, if you really look at the actual record, in terms, he does bring a lot to the area. He brings a lot in forms of earmarks. Some do some good, some useless, and seem to be political payback. You know, like the 4 boats that cost $16 million that had no value, that have no purpose, or arguably the tunnel that took place in Bremerton that has really disrupted a lot of the downtown business there. But even a more fundamental matter is some of the votes that he's taken that have actually completely undermined the very fabric of the economy. And by that, I've touched on the free trade agreements. He's broken with the majority of Democrats voting basically for programs that move jobs overseas, make it impossible for our industries to compete when you're by removing a lot of these regulations. He's also removed a lot of the regulations that have kept the very basis of our economy safe. A lot of people are familiar with, for example, the savings and loan scandal of the 1980s. He voted for a lot of the deregulation that allowed that to happen. So to kind of go into that in just a little bit of detail, you had these protections put in place around the savings and loan that prevented them from getting involved in speculative debt. And you had, and the result, because you had these protections in place, all of their monies were insured. Well, you removed all the protections, but you kept all the insurance there. So then you'd have these savings and loans buy these completely worthless properties and begin trading them back and forth, upping the price each time. Now, of course, these people who own these savings and loans are making huge amounts of money on paper, but there's nothing behind it. And eventually the whole thing collapses, as it does. And when it collapses, unfortunately, the taxpayer was left holding the debt of these inflated prices that had nothing backing them up. That changed this country from the world's greatest creditor to the world's greatest debtor nation. And a lot of that happened because of deregulation that Mr. Dix supported. I mean, McCain famously is involved in that, and I'm really just amazed that the media is not bringing this up. He was one of the Keating Five. But I suspect one of the reasons that the Democrats are not running with it is because you have people like Mr. Dix who were as well involved in that. You can also look at what Mr. Dix has allowed to happen to the protections that were put in place after the Depression. You had the Glass-Steagall Act put in place that basically separated the consumer banks from the speculator banks. there was a firewall there, so that when you had, again, protections put in place for our banks, they would involve themselves in very limited types of transactions that were safe. Well, that was just shot to pieces with the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act in 2000. And Mr. Dix was one of those who went along with that vote. And now when we're starting to see these banks closing, and they're telling us we may be seeing upwards of 100 banks closing in the next few months, those are policies that he allowed to happen. You can go on down the list. The Commodities Deregulation Act. What are the things that allowed leveraged buyouts? Let's sort of look at some of the effects those have had on some industries. For example, the timber industry. Why did we have this sort of rush of clear cutting taking place starting in the 80s? Well, you had these leveraged buyouts where companies where investors, people who really produced nothing of actual value, were able to buy these timber companies for very little down. So they buy these timber companies for almost very little down, and then they're left holding these bill. How do they pay off the bill? You start clear cutting. You wipe out all that's there, and then you sell it. So they've made money, but they've gutted entire industries. Industries that have been there for generations, harvesting these logs arguably sustainably, they're gone. That's not bringing jobs. Or let's look what happened to, for example, a local grocery chain, Fred Meyer. You had, again, leveraged buyouts. A leveraged buyout firm, Colbert, Kravitz, and Roberts, some of whom continue to be major players, funders of the Democratic Party, bought Fred Meyer for very little down. Sacked most of the people. Once they got in, they sacked most of the workers who were given a high wage. And they raised the prices. What does that do? Well, on paper now, they're making a huge amount of money. They're suddenly profitable, more profitable than ever. So they start issuing all these new shares. They sell off the shares. So they no longer own Fred Meyer. They're left holding a ton of money. But the company... the company's been sacked, people who've had safe, secure jobs, they're gone. They're gone. That's not giving jobs, and that's not helping the local economy.
So if you were elected, would you restore some of those firewalls that had previously been in place?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We need to be restoring those firewalls. Talking about a complete free market is absolute nonsense if anyone... believes that having the largest shark eat the smaller sharks is going to give us some sort of an ecosystem is just complete nonsense. Okay. Anyone in the audience think that Microsoft Vista is the best programming system possible today, or even a functional one? It doesn't work. We need to be putting in regulations on trade. You need to be protecting our own industries, and we need to be developing more local industries, and we need to be defending our civil liberties more strongly. Revoke the Patriot Act right away. Get rid of put posse comitatus back in place. Try and turn around what we did on the FISA vote as much as we can. And frankly, we should be holding the president and the administration accountable for their crimes. There's a lot we can do, and we need to get out of this war right away. Just what we can track. It's cost this district at least $1.4 billion, and as we know, military accounting is notoriously horrible. So that's just what we can track there.
So when you say this war, I assume you're talking about the war in Iraq as
the war and occupation in Iraq, yeah. Yeah.
So we also have a war going in Afghanistan. We have the war on terror, the war on drugs. I mean, so many wars.
Yes.
So what would you expand on beyond the war on Iraq? We're also looking at a potential threat with Iran. How would you deal with that? And also get back to Afghanistan. What would you do there?
Well, and a lot of what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of hype because our country is such a military-based economy, when you have that large a military, it's basically beholden to foreign threats so it can continue to fund itself. It sort of becomes almost like a salesperson on commission. Well, I've got to kind of find this sort of problem. In Iran, you want to look at the history of what happened in Iran. Iran, from about 1900 to about 1950, was basically a colony of the British Petroleum Company. And the British Petroleum Company was basically an arm of the British Navy. It was a brutal dictatorship. It was a country run for the benefit of a foreign corporation serving the military-industrial complex. From about 2 years in the early 1950s, they had a democracy go back in place under Mossadegh, and the British even tried to overthrow them. They tried, failed. So after the British failed, the U.S. came in and CIA came in, and they actually overthrew a democracy so that we could have better access, or some private companies could have better access to our oil supply. When we overthrew that democracy, we installed one of the most brutal dictators that has ever existed on the planet, the Shah of Iran. He methodically extinguished, killed, murdered, tortured any members of the opposition, any viable political opposition. So by the time he was eventually pushed out, the Ayatollah Khomeini was basically, the religious leaders were basically the only thing resembling an opposition left. That's why they came into place, sort of a result of our Munster putting them there. And then we still got upset about that. And then we had a surrogate, you may have heard of by the name of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, who then had a proxy war with Iran that cost the Iranians over 1 million people, over 1 million casualties. That one war alone cost the Iranians more casualties, body for body, several times than the U.S. has suffered in all wars of the 20th century. That's kind of astounding when you think about it for a country that size. So, we're rattling our sabers about going into Iran. Well, I think we not only need to communicate with Iran, but we need to begin that communication with a heartfelt apology. In terms of Afghanistan, it's funny. Once we got into Afghanistan, the amount of opium trade started going off the roof. Similar to what happened when we went into Panama and throughout Noriega, and suddenly the cocaine processing chemicals increased several-fold. Similar to what happened when we went into Vietnam and the amount of heroin started going up. Heroin production started going up. It's been proven that we have rogue elements of our government that benefit from this. It's not the guy in the corner who's bringing these drugs who has the infrastructure to bring these elaborate drugs into our country. It is very often our own country. We had very good evidence of that with some of the scandals that broke in the 1980s around Iran-Contra. And that some of these people who were so deeply involved in it were able to come back, rehabilitate themselves, and run this country from the White House for the last 8 years is just utterly disgusting. And we have very little that we can hold ourselves up to as the rest of the world. But, when you look at stuff like this also, and some of this can sort of look kind of dour and stuff, you also have to remember that by looking at this, we've got the opportunity to turn this around. And as you know, this is, on the local level, this is stuff that I have done. For example, when the University of Washington police were looking at getting M16s, I got the facts out about it. They were saying, well, these are smaller bullets. Okay, so I was able to get meetings going, get the local student senate, graduate student senate aware of this. I said, we've got smaller bullets. Doesn't that mean they actually travel faster and go further? Oh, well, yes, but... And what is there? I get a meeting with the head of the police, and I go University of Washington Police, and I go, well, what's the actual incident that's prompted you to want to get these? Basic question. There was this incident that happened in Texas in the 1960s. There was an incident that happened in Texas in the 1960s. everyone's eyes kind of eyes go up, jaws drop open, and they decide, maybe not a good idea if we go forward with this. I played a major role in ending a pilot program in Oregon that had the National Guard accompanying police on drug raids. It was just something that, the local media initially, when they first started the program, described it as this wonderful thing that was going to happen, and they highlighted one of the actions in their version of an embedded report on the news. Well, went over there with other reporters and covered what was actually happening. And we found out that the person who had been named in the actual warrant had moved out of the house a couple of weeks ago, and that all that was seized was one marijuana cigarette. And we got witnesses of people who had actually been attacked by these units, someone who'd been shot in the arm by a less lethal weapon with enough power to break his arm, and his arm was actually at the time being held in front of his heart, so potentially a lethal blow. And you go to community meetings, you get the facts out, you're correct with the facts, and you just keep doing this, and eventually you can shift this stuff around. And this is what's happened on a national level as well. With our under our second president, John Adams, we were looking at the Alien and the Seditions Acts. It used to be illegal under President Adams to make critical remarks of the president. You had 17 newspapers shut down for criticizing the president. But we don't have those laws in place because people got upset and people voted those guys out. And people said this is enough. Even a better example, the Bill of Rights, which most people think of as being that part of the Constitution that is our rights, didn't come in place because you had these wise founding fathers who said, we're going to give these people rights. No, Look, when the Constitution was written, the Constitution is, on a lot of levels, a very elitist document. You read the history books and you find out that it was written in a closed room, in over 100-degree weather, mind you, closed room, no ventilation. George Washington's forbidding anyone from taking notes. And they're even patrolling the perimeter to make sure no one's hearing in what they're saying. This is, they have the revolution. They win the revolution, 1783. They're not able to get the Constitution passed till 1787, 4 years. What's going on there? Well, you have the people who've actually fought on the ground in the revolution. They're still out there. They're still armed. And you're having outbreaks. You're having sort of a similar sort of situation that's happening now. The veterans are coming back from the war, having fought it for years. And they're faced with these enormous crushing debts. Many of them were losing their homes, their farms at the time. And they're saying, wait a minute, why did we do this? And you're having armed outbreaks, as in Shays' Rebellion, the Whiskey Rebellion. And the people who are running the country are saying, maybe we can, maybe we can't, but maybe we can take these peasants out. But we've got the England and France breathing down our throats. And if we have to take on these peasants and take on England and France, we're going to probably go down. So you have what's known as basically then a peace treaty between the people who wrote the Constitution, or essentially the new elite. Bear in mind that these people were people who were basically living beyond their means, building these enormous estates. That's why most of the founding fathers die broke or near broke. The sort of consumer model is one that was basically in this country on a lot of levels from day one. But you've got these new elite, and you've also got the people who've actually fought the revolution on the ground level, and that's what the Bill of Rights is. It's a peace treaty. So the First Amendment is guaranteeing them the right to speak out against the government. The Second Amendment isn't there to blow away Bambi. It's there so you can defend yourself against the government. And on down the road, these are the rights, the rights to due process that are there in the Fourth through the Eighth Amendments are there to guarantee due process, which hadn't been happening under the King of England, and we're starting to lose under laws like the Patriot Act that are being pushed that are being supported by people like the Congressman Norm Dix. Rights like rights of the individual under the Ninth and Tenth Amendment, which are being taken away through things like these free trade agreements, rights to prevent troops from entering into your home, which were there under the Third Amendment, which are being taken away by things like the Defense Authorization Act and some of the earlier moves to things like community policing and confiscation of property under the drug laws and put in place under the 1994 Omnibus Crime Bill largely, which Dix also voted for. All of those were there for a very specific reason, and the congressman has voted against it. I guess we're kind of running down on time. Again, my name's Paul Richmond. I'm running for Congress. My website is richmondforcongress.com. I really need help in getting the word out about this. This is a top 2 primary. So what it means is the 2 people who get the most votes will advance to the general election. The congressman has been methodically not only just ducking me, but trying to extinguish my name from any of public discourse. That means doing things like removing my, pressuring Democratic clubs to remove my literature from tables and booths, trying to pressure them from preventing me from speaking at public events. Like I was told this Friday, there's a meeting of the Pierce County Democrats on Sunday. No, I'm not going to be able to speak there. And it's been just very odd. At the most recent debate in the University of Puget Sound, which was sponsored by the League of Women Voters, a very credible organization, not only did the incumbent not show up, the incumbent had a lot of his staff there basically to pepper me with questions. You've got 3 people running against him, but I've been running far and away the most serious campaign. I'm endorsed by the former director of field operations of the Dix campaign in 2006. This is someone, and you can see this on my website, who worked hard to bring change around in 2006, thought that the Democrats, getting some Democrats in office would do that, and was just like almost emotionally, maybe destroyed is almost not too strong a word, but destroyed by when he saw, my God, these people are just going to roll over and they're not going to make any more change. And he wrote a very good letter where, in support of me, just describing how on law after law, Mr. Dix has betrayed what he worked for. So my name, again, Paul Richmond. We have signs available in our Tacoma office, usually Monday through Friday. We have literature there. We have people who can get you literature in most of the 6th District, signs. Let your friends know about this. My website, richmondforcongress.com. Phone numbers in Tacoma, 253-267-7000. Up in the Olympic Peninsula, 360-379-5575. Email Richmond, 4, Congress@yahoo.com. If you, can I ask for donations on the air?
I don't think you can.
Okay, then I can't ask for donations on the air. You can find out information about that on the website, probably. And as well as all kinds of other information, and we can use people, just let everyone you know that this campaign is happening so that we've got a shot at it. If we get in the top 2, these issues will be there, and I think I've got a real good chance of it.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming in this morning.
Thank you so much, Mike.